The fragment zone earned its name honestly. This region of space had been shattered by decades of weapons testing and skirmishes, until reality itself developed scar tissue. Lieutenant Jaron Kovac watched his sensors paint the void in colors that represented spatial instability, radiation pockets, and areas where normal physics had filed for early retirement. It was beautiful in a deeply unsettling way, like watching a kaleidoscope made of broken universes. His ship, the Nomad's Drift, was designed for exactly this kind of territory. Small enough to slip through the stable corridors, shielded enough to survive brief exposure to the nastier anomalies, and carrying absolutely no weapons that might make someone think he was worth shooting at. Jaron preferred it that way. His job was mapping the chaos, not adding to it. "Survey Beacon 17 deployed," he murmured to the empty cockpit, logging the data point. "Spatial stability at 63%. Recommend avoiding this corridor during high solar activity unless you enjoy existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously." The ship's AI chirped acknowledgement in tones that managed to convey both agreement and concern. Jaron had programmed her. He thought of the AI as female, though that was pure projection, to be cautious. Better to have a worried co-pilot than an overconfident one when your workspace could collapse into non-existence without warning. The proximity alert pinged. Not a threat warning, just information. Unusual energy signatures, bearing 047, distance approximately 2,000 kilometers. Jaron pulled up the sensor analysis and felt his stomach drop. Those weren't natural fluctuations. Someone was using a spatial corridor, one of the temporary rifts that both sides exploited for covert movement, and it was collapsing. "Damn it," he breathed, already adjusting course. "Why? Why can't people learn that these corridors have expiration dates? They're not roads, they're controlled tiers in reality, and they don't care about your travel schedule." The AI made questioning noises. She knew his protocols as well as he did. Survey missions maintained strict neutrality. You didn't investigate potential military operations. You logged the data and moved on. But those energy readings suggested someone was inside that corridor when it started failing. Jaron pulled up the collapse rate projections and swore more creatively. Maybe 90 seconds before the whole structure imploded. If someone was trapped in there. "This is stupid," he told the AI. "This is absolutely stupid and violates at least 7 regulations." She made encouraging sounds that he interpreted as agreement with his assessment, while supporting his decision anyway. That was the nice thing about programming your own co-pilot's personality. She tended to agree with you even when you were being an idiot. The Nomad's Drift accelerated toward the failing corridor, and Jaron activated the emergency stabilization field, a short-range projection that could theoretically hold open a spatial rift for brief periods. Theoretically. He'd never actually tested it on a corridor this close to collapse because that would be insane. The corridor manifested on his view screen as a writhing tunnel of impossible geometry, its structure visibly deteriorating. Space-time was literally tearing itself apart, revealing the nothing that wasn't quite nothing underneath reality. And there, pinned beneath what looked like debris from a destroyed ship, was a figure in armor. Jaron's sensors identified the armor's design immediately. Scarring, enemy combatant, possibly military, possibly intelligence, definitely someone he should absolutely leave to their fate according to every protocol in the book. He extended the stabilization field anyway. The corridor screamed. That was the only word for the sound it made as competing forces tried to tear it apart while his field tried to hold it together. Jaron activated the tractor beam, focusing on the debris pinning the figure down. It was crude work like performing surgery with a sledgehammer, but it was the only option. The debris shifted. The armored figure looked up, and even through the distortion of failing space-time and a cracked helmet visor, Jaron could see the shock in her eyes. Purple eyes, he noted distantly. Very purple, very surprised. He triggered the hard light bridge, a solid projection of force extending from his airlock. "Come on," he muttered, though she couldn't hear him. "Move. You've got maybe 30 seconds before this whole thing becomes a physics problem with no survivors." But she didn't move, just stared at him like he'd materialized out of a fever dream, which, fair enough, he probably had. Then she spoke, her voice cutting through the emergency channel with perfect clarity despite the chaos. "You've captured me, so finish me." Jaren blinked. "What? No, I'm trying to save you. Can you move your legs?" The corridor gave what he could only describe as a warning shudder. Space-time was reaching its breaking point, and they were going to break with it unless someone made a decision in the next 10 seconds. Jaren made the decision. He engaged the emergency protocols that transformed his cockpit into a pressure suit, sealed the airlock, and crossed the hardlight bridge at a run. The scaring woman was half buried in debris that seemed to be made of crystallized energy and organic components. Their technology always did look like it was grown rather than built. Up close, he could see the damage to her armor, the way her breathing was shallow and pained, the blood that was definitely not human red staining the inside of her helmet. "This is going to be uncomfortable," he said, grabbing her under the arms. "Brace for." The corridor chose that moment to give up on existence. Jaren felt the pull of collapsing space-time, that terrible suction that wanted to drag everything into the non-space between realities. He triggered his suit's emergency thrusters, designed for debris field maneuvering, definitely not designed for this, and hauled them both back across the hardlight bridge as reality dissolved behind them. They tumbled through the airlock. The ship's safeties engaged, sealing the door and pressurizing the chamber. The corridor's death scream cut off abruptly as the Nomad's drift severed the connection and accelerated away from the implosion zone. Jaren lay on the deck, tangled with an alien warrior who probably outweighed him by a significant margin once you factored in the armor. His heart was trying to break several speed records. His hands were shaking. And his brain was very loudly informing him that he just violated numerous regulations while saving someone who might very well kill him as soon as she regained consciousness. "Well," he gasped to the ceiling, "that happened." The scaring woman shifted against him. Her helmet had cracked further in the fall, and through the damaged visor he could see her face clearly now. Angular features that were almost human but not quite, those remarkable purple eyes, and an expression that cycled from shock to confusion to something that might have been fear. She tried to speak, coughed, and tried again. "Why? Why what? Why didn't you finish me?" Jaren carefully extricated himself from the tangle, sitting up and triggering his helmet release. The cockpit air smelled like ozone and adrenaline. "Because you were trapped, that seemed like enough reason to help." She stared at him like he'd just spoken in a language that shouldn't exist. Her hand moved to her helmet controls, hesitated, then completed the release. The armor segments separated with organic fluidity, and she pulled the helmet off to reveal features that were striking even through obvious pain and exhaustion. "You are human," she said, as if confirming something impossible. "Last time I checked, yeah. We are enemies." "Are we?" "Because from where I'm sitting, we're two people who almost got erased from existence. That seems like it should supersede politics." She tried to sit up, gasped, and settled for propping herself against the airlock wall. Her breathing was wrong, broken ribs. Jaren's medic training supplied helpfully. Possible punctured lung. Definitely a concussion given how she'd hit her head during the extraction. "Medical bay," he said, standing and offering his hand. "You need treatment." She looked at his hand like it might be a trap. "You captured me." "I pulled you out of a collapsing spatial corridor. That's different. You are the enemy." "You keep saying that. Doesn't change the fact that you're injured and I'm the only person in the immediate area with medical supplies." He kept his hand extended. "So you can accept help, or you can sit there and argue politics while possibly bleeding internally. Your choice." For a long moment, she just stared at him, those purple eyes searching his face for something he couldn't identify. Then slowly, She reached up and took his hand. Her grip was strong despite the injuries, and there was something ceremonial in the way she accepted the help, as if the gesture carried more weight than the simple physics of pulling someone to their feet. She swayed when she stood, and Jaren steadied her without thinking. "The medical bay is this way," he said, guiding her through the narrow corridor. "Fair warning, it's designed for humans, so the equipment might not work perfectly for your physiology. But basic treatment should translate." She moved carefully, one hand pressed to her ribs, the other trailing along the wall for balance. "You speak as if this is normal, treating enemy wounded. It's not normal, but neither is pulling people out of collapsing space-time. I'm having an unusual day." That startled something that might have been a laugh from her, quickly suppressed. They reached the medical bay, barely larger than a closet but equipped for emergency field treatment. Jaren helped her onto the examination table and started pulling up diagnostic protocols. "I am going to need to remove damaged armor sections," he said, trying to sound professional. "Is there a release mechanism I should know about?" She reached for the controls at her waist, triggered something, and the armor began separating along seam lines that hadn't been visible before. Beneath it, she wore a form-fitting bodysuit that was also damaged, torn in places and stained with blood that was darker than human but not radically so. Jaren focused on the injuries, not the implications. Broken ribs, 3 of them. Lacerations from energy discharge. Significant bruising. Possible internal bleeding. He worked methodically, his training taking over, applying stabilizers and sealants while trying to ignore how strange it was to be treating someone whose biology was almost familiar but not quite. "You have done this before," she observed, watching him work. "Field medic certification, required for Survey Corps personnel who work alone." He applied a neural dampener to help with the concussion. "This might feel weird. It's designed for human neurology, but the principles should be similar enough." She didn't flinch when he pressed the device to her temple, just continued watching him with that intense focus. "You risk much for an enemy." "You keep calling yourself that. I don't know you well enough to have an opinion on whether we're enemies." He finished sealing the worst of the lacerations. "Right now you're someone who was injured. That's enough. This is not how wars are won." "Good thing I'm not trying to win a war, then." He stepped back, examining his work. "That should hold until you can get proper treatment from your own medical services. The ribs will need time to heal, and you should avoid anything that might stress them. So no hand-to-hand combat, heavy lifting, or aggressive coughing." "You are releasing me." Jaren looked at her, confused. "Was I keeping you prisoner?" "Because that wasn't the plan. I said you captured me. And I said I pulled you out of a collapsing corridor. We're going to have to agree that we're describing 2 different things." He pulled up the ship's navigation. "Where were you headed?" "I can drop you near a safe zone, where your people can retrieve you." She didn't answer immediately, her expression cycling through emotions Jaren couldn't identify. Finally, she spoke, and her voice carried a weight he didn't understand. "What is your name?" "Jaren Kavek, lieutenant with the Frontier Survey Corps." He paused. "And you are?" "Shekai Ves." Another pause longer. "Princess Shekai Ves of the Scaring Empire." Jaren felt something in his stomach drop. "Princess. Of course you're a princess. Because why would I rescue someone normal? That would be too easy." And despite her injuries, despite the confusion and shock, despite everything, Shekai laughed. A genuine sound that transformed her severe features into something unexpected. "Yes," she said, "this day is unusual for both of us." Shekai woke to the sound of quiet machinery and the distinct absence of pain she should be feeling. The neural dampener was working, then, dulling the worst of her injuries while her body began its natural healing processes. She'd been unconscious for, checking her internal chronometer, approximately 7 hours, not long enough for proper rest but enough to take the edge off exhaustion. The medical bay was exactly as she remembered. Cramped, utilitarian, and currently occupied by Lieutenant Jaren Kavek, who sat in the corner reading something on a datapad while occasionally glancing at what appeared to be her vital signs on a monitoring display. He noticed her attention immediately. "You're awake. Good. How's the pain level?" Shekai cataloged sensations methodically. The broken ribs were stabilized, the concussion managed, the various lacerations sealed with competent if unfamiliar medical adhesive. "Tolerable. Your treatments are effective. I'm pleased I didn't accidentally poison you. Xenobiology was not my strongest subject." He set down the datapad. "There's water if you need it. And something the synthesizer assures me is nutritionally appropriate for scaring metabolism, though I make no promises about taste." She accepted the water, noting how he made no move to approach or crowd her space. Everything about his body language suggested caution without fear, the posture of someone accustomed to dealing with potentially dangerous situations through careful neutrality. "You said you would release me," Shekai said, testing. "I said I could drop you near a safe zone. That offer stands." He gestured to the navigation display. "We're currently in neutral space, about 6 hours from the nearest scaring patrol route. I can signal them if you'd prefer, or I can just deposit you somewhere they'll find you. Your choice." "Why haven't you contacted your command structure?" "Because I'm a reconnaissance officer on a survey mission. My job is mapping spatial anomalies, not capturing enemy officers." He said it so matter-of-factly that Shekai had to process the statement twice. "Also, honestly, the paperwork would be a nightmare. Explaining how I violated about 7 neutrality protocols to pull you out of that corridor would involve reports I don't have the patience to write. So you are simply letting me go. Was there another option you preferred?" Shekai sat up carefully, testing her body's responses. Everything protested, but nothing screamed emergency. "In my culture, when a warrior is captured, they offer their opponent the honor of finishing them. A clean end that acknowledges defeat with dignity." "You wanted me to kill you," Jaren said flatly. "I expected you to claim your victory. That is how wars function." "That's how wars keep happening," he corrected. "Killing people who are already beaten doesn't accomplish anything except making their friends and family angry enough to keep fighting. It's stupid, wasteful, and doesn't actually solve whatever problem started the conflict in the first place." The casual dismissal of something so fundamental to her culture should have been offensive. Instead, Shekai found it refreshing. "You do not believe in decisive action. I believe in action that actually decides something useful. Keeping you alive seems more useful than killing you would be." He stood, moving to check the medical monitors. "Your vitals are stabilizing well. Another day of rest and you should be functional enough to not immediately collapse when I drop you off." "A day, maybe 2. Broken ribs aren't something you rush, regardless of species." Before Shekai could respond, proximity alarms activated, subtle enough not to be threatening, but present enough to indicate another vessel in sensor range. Jaren's expression shifted from relaxed concern to focused attention as he pulled up the sensor data. "Scaring patrol cruiser," he read off the display. "Running standard search patterns, probably looking for you. You will signal them." "Do you want me to signal them?" The question caught her off guard. "It is not about what I want. It is logical. I am found. You return me. This resolves the situation." "Except you didn't answer my question." He looked at her directly, and there was something uncomfortably perceptive in his gaze. "Do you want me to contact them right now?" Shekai's mind raced through implications. If she returned immediately, she would have to explain how she survived the ambush, how she was captured, how a human enemy showed her mercy when her own doctrine would have demanded death. The questions would be endless, the political maneuvering immediate. Her position at court was already complicated. Third daughter meant she had authority without direct succession, power without the protections that came with being an heir. Her enemies would use this situation, twist it, question her judgment or even her loyalty. And she would have no defense except the truth, that a human had shown her more honor than her own empire's philosophy allowed. "What do you want from me?" she asked instead of answering. Jaren looked genuinely confused. "Want from you? Nothing. I pulled you out of a spatial anomaly. You're recovering. When you're ready, you go home. That's the whole plan. No one does anything without reason, without expectation of return. I do constantly. It's kind of my defining character trait at this point." He moved toward the communication station. "But seriously, should I hail them? Because they're going to pass by in about 20 minutes, and after that it'll be another day before we intersect another patrol route." Shekai made a decision that surprised even herself. "Don't signal them. Not yet." He paused. "You want to stay on my ship? I want time to think, to understand what happened, too." She struggled for words in human standard, finally settling on, "To reconcile expectation with reality. The reality being that I didn't kill you when I had the chance. The reality being that you showed me honor my own culture would call weakness, and I do not yet know what that means." Jaren studied her for a long moment, then shrugged with the air of someone accustomed to his life, not following any logical pattern. "All right, we can wait. But fair warning, this ship is small, the food synthesizer is terrible, and my conversation skills are limited mostly to spatial anomalies and occasionally complaining about bureaucracy. I will manage." They waited in silence as the scaring patrol passed through sensor range, searching for a princess who was already found but choosing to remain hidden. And in that silence, Shekai began to understand that some rescues took longer than others. The days that followed established an unexpected rhythm. Jaren continued his work, deploying survey beacons, mapping energy fluctuations, logging data with methodical precision. Shekai watched him, initially from boredom, then from genuine fascination. "You just fly around and document spatial anomalies," she said on the second day, watching him mark another unstable corridor on his charts. "That's the job. Someone has to know where the dangerous areas are, otherwise ships fly through them and cease existing in uncomfortable ways. This is not glorious work." "Nope, but it keeps people alive, which beats glory pretty handily in my opinion." He glanced back at her. "What's glorious about your job, besides the princess part?" "I command the Eclipse Guard. Elite warriors who serve as both military force and diplomatic protection. We are trained in 17 combat forms, 6 diplomatic protocols, and the political theory necessary to navigate court intrigue." She paused. "It is prestigious. Sounds exhausting." "It is both." They talked while he worked. Conversations that ranged from tactical philosophy you'd have to be just to have time for actual work between duels. Despite herself, Shekai laughed. There was something freeing about his casual irreverence, his complete disregard for the weight of tradition she'd been trained to carry. He approached everything with the same pragmatic focus. Problems existed to be solved, not to be made more complicated. On the third day, she told him why she'd joined the military. "Third daughter," she explained. "Not important enough to inherit the throne, too important to be ignored. Every action is scrutinized, every choice becomes political currency. The Eclipse Guard was the only path that was truly mine." "Only child," Jaren responded. "Parents wanted me in colonial administration. Endless meetings about resource allocation and trade agreements. I chose the Survey Corps specifically because they promised I could work alone and nobody would bother me. And yet here you are. Yeah, the universe has a sense of humor." The turning point came on the 4th day when Jaren's sensors picked up a distress signal. A human supply transport under attack by rogue mining drones, automated systems corrupted by the fragment zone's radiation, their programming degraded into aggressive territorial behavior. Jaren altered course immediately. "This will reveal your position to any nearby military vessels," Shekai pointed out. "They're in trouble. People are going to die if someone doesn't help. You risk exposure for strangers." "I risk exposure because it's the right thing to do." He was already calculating intercept vectors. You can stay out of sensor range in the aft compartment if you want. No reason for you to be involved." Instead, Shekai moved to the co-pilot station. "Show me your weapon systems." "I don't really have weapon systems. I have some mining lasers repurposed for clearing debris and a tractor beam." "That will suffice. I have combat training." "You have spatial awareness. Together we are moderately less likely to die accomplishing this rescue." He glanced at her, surprise clear on his face, then nodded. "All right. Welcome to the worst combat vessel in the fleet. Let's go save some people." They worked together with surprising synchronization, Jaren maneuvering through the debris field and failing corridors with practiced precision, Shekai targeting drones with accuracy that turned improvised weapons into effective tools. The supply transport's crew followed Jaren's instructions, their panic gradually replaced by hope as the Nomad's drift systematically disabled the threats. When a scouring patrol appeared, drawn by the distress signal, Shekai made her choice without hesitation. She opened a communication channel, identified herself with full formal titles, and ordered them to stand down and assist with the rescue. The shock in the patrol commander's voice was audible. "Your Highness, we have been searching, and now I am found. Assist with the rescue operations, then maintain distance. I will contact you when I am ready to discuss my return." After the transport had limped away to safety and the scouring patrol had withdrawn in confused obedience, Jaren turned to her with a question. "You didn't have to do that. Reveal yourself. You risked exposure to save strangers. The least I could do was ensure you weren't fired upon for your kindness." She met his eyes. "You showed me mercy. I am beginning to understand it is not the weakness my culture claims." "What is it then?" "A different kind of strength. One that builds rather than destroys." She straightened in the co-pilot seat, decision crystallizing. "Jaren Kavak, I require transport to the nearest neutral station. I have something important to do." "What kind of important?" "The kind that hasn't been done in 3 centuries. The kind that will complicate both our lives significantly." She smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "I am going to invoke the bond of reversal." "I have absolutely no idea what that means." "You will, and I suspect you will either regret saving me or realize it was the most important thing you've ever done. Those are very different outcomes." "Yes," Shekai agreed. "That is what makes this interesting." Crosspoint Sanctuary hung in space like a geometrical fever dream, a massive station built by 3 different species with incompatible design philosophies, resulting in architecture that was functional, ugly, and somehow beautiful in its complete disregard for aesthetic coherence. Jaren had been here twice before, both times just long enough to file survey reports and resupply. He'd never imagined returning with an alien princess who was about to trigger a diplomatic incident. "So," he said as they approached the docking sequence, "you're going to explain this bond thing before we get there, right? Because I'd like to know what I'm getting into." Shekai sat in the co-pilot seat, her damaged armor replaced by borrowed clothing from the ship's emergency supplies, human-sized and therefore ill-fitting but functional. She'd spent the last 2 hours in what appeared to be meditation, and when she opened her eyes, there was a determined calm in her expression. "The bond of reversal is an ancient tradition," she began. "From before the Scarian Empire unified, when we were scattered clans with individual honor codes. One of those codes addressed a specific situation. When an enemy showed complete mercy, sparing a captured warrior without condition, without expectation, without gain, the spared warrior could choose to invoke the bond. Which does what exactly? It acknowledges that the enemy's honor exceeded our own, that their action was so far beyond what duty required that it deserves recognition. The bond says, I was wrong about you, and I choose to stand with you rather than against you." Jaren processed this, so it's like switching sides. It is more complex. It is declaring that you showed me such exceptional honor that I align myself with you specifically. Not your nation or your military, but you as an individual. She paused. The bonded warrior offers their loyalty, their protection, and their political weight to the one who showed mercy. And this is acceptable legally. It is traditional, which means refusing it would dishonor the entire concept of the bond, and by extension, dishonor the warrior who invokes it. My empire prides itself on respecting tradition. Her smile was sharp. They will have no choice but to accept it. Except I'm human, your enemy. The bond was created when all outsiders were enemies. Its entire purpose is to transform enmity into alliance through recognition of exceptional honor. She looked at him directly. You earned this, Jaren Kavak, whether you wanted it or not. The docking was smooth, and they were met by station security, a mixed crew of humans, Scarine, and a species Jaren didn't immediately recognize. The presence of a Scarine princess on a human survey vessel raised immediate concerns, but Shekai's calm authority diffused most of the tension. She requested a formal audience with the Scarine diplomatic corps, and by the time they'd processed that request, the station's human representatives had also been notified. Captain Iris Chen, the senior human diplomatic observer, arrived looking like someone who'd been expecting a quiet day and instead got news of an interstellar incident. She was in her 50s, with the kind of weathered competence that suggested decades of navigating impossible situations. Lieutenant Kavak, she said with impressive composure, I wasn't aware your survey mission included diplomatic functions. It didn't, Jaren confirmed. This is all very new and unexpected for everyone involved. Your Highness, Chen continued, turning to Shekai with a formal bow. The Frontier Council is pleased that you're safe. We were unaware you'd been in danger. I was extracted from a collapsing spatial corridor by Lieutenant Kavak. He showed considerable courage and compassion. Shekai's tone made it clear this wasn't a request for acknowledgement, but a statement of fact. I am here to formalize my response to his actions. The formal audience took place in a chamber designed for multi-species diplomacy, variable gravity, adjustable atmosphere, and translation systems sophisticated enough to handle cultural nuance. The Scarine diplomatic team arrived looking distinctly unhappy, led by Ambassador Krell, whose silver scales and deep-set eyes suggested both age and considerable political experience. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Princess Shekai, your disappearance has caused significant concern. We must arrange your immediate return to— I invoke the bond of reversal, Shekai interrupted, her voice carrying formal weight. Let it be recorded and witnessed by all present. The silence that followed was profound. Jaren watched shock ripple through the Scarine delegation, watched Ambassador Krell's expression cycle through disbelief and barely controlled anger. Your Highness, Krell said carefully, you cannot be serious. The bond has not been invoked in over 300 years. It is archaic, impractical, and traditional, Shekai cut in, and therefore binding under Scarine law. I was in mortal danger. Lieutenant Kavak showed me complete mercy, asking nothing, expecting nothing, offering me honor when I anticipated death. By our oldest laws, I claim the right to stand with him. He is human, another diplomat protested. The bond was never intended for application to— The bond was never intended for enemies at all, Shekai countered. It was created when all outsiders were potential threats. Its entire purpose is to transform enmity into alliance through recognition of exceptional honor. Lieutenant Kavak demonstrated that honor. I claim him. Jaren raised his hand slightly. Quick question, what exactly does claim him mean? Because the phrasing is concerning. Shekai turned to him, and there was something fierce and absolute in her expression. It means I choose to align myself with you, to offer my loyalty, my protection, and my political weight in support of your actions and character. Not because I am compelled, but because I choose to recognize that you saw me as worth saving when I was your enemy. She looked back at the delegation. It means the Scarine Empire must acknowledge this bond or admit that our honor codes are meaningless when they become politically inconvenient. Ambassador Krell looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 5 minutes. The implications are significant, Shekai agreed. A princess of the Empire invoking the bond with a human officer creates precedent for alliance, for cooperation, for the possibility that our species can see each other as more than enemies. Rejecting my claim would be rejecting that possibility. Captain Chen spoke up for the first time. If I may offer the Frontier Council's perspective, we would view Princess Shekai's gesture as a potential foundation for renewed peace negotiations. Her willingness to extend this traditional honor to one of our officers demonstrates that bridge building between our peoples is possible. Refusing her claim would suggest the scaring Empire values pride over progress. It was masterfully played, making acceptance the honorable path and rejection the cowardly one. Jaren could see Krell recognize the trap even as he struggled to find an exit. This will require consultation with the throne, Krell said finally. Princess Shekai, if you insist on this course, we cannot prevent you, but neither can we immediately accept the political ramifications without proper consideration. Then consider, Shekai said, but know that my claim stands regardless of your decision. The bond is invoked. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. The meeting dissolved into emergency communications with both governments, leaving Jaren and Shekai in an observation lounge while diplomats frantically tried to figure out what to do with an ancient tradition that nobody had planned for. So, Jaren said eventually, watching ships move past the viewport, your entire empire is now dealing with political fallout because I pulled you out of a collapsing corridor. Yes, and you've essentially declared yourself my ally, which is confusing both our governments and probably violating several treaties. Likely yes. And this is all because I decided that leaving someone to die was a bad idea. Because you showed me that mercy is not weakness. That honor can mean choosing to preserve rather than destroy. She turned to face him. You changed everything, Jaren Kavak. I was supposed to see you as the enemy. Instead, you became the only person who saw me as worth saving without conditions. I'm pretty sure anyone would have. No, she interrupted firmly. They wouldn't. My own people would have calculated political cost. Your people would have seen an enemy officer and valuable intelligence. You saw someone trapped and decided that was enough reason to help. That is worth standing with. In the viewport, Jaren could see both scaring and human diplomatic vessels arriving, the beginning of negotiations neither side had planned for but both had to navigate. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait while politicians panic. Then when they realize they cannot refuse the bond without looking weak, we propose something productive. She smiled. How would you feel about leading a joint survey mission? Mixed human and scaring crews, mapping the fragment zone, sharing data that could save lives on both sides. That sounds surprisingly optimistic for someone who was literally dying 4 days ago. You taught me optimism. The least I can do is use it productively. The bond was accepted, reluctantly, with considerable political maneuvering, but it was accepted. The scaring empire couldn't afford to reject their own traditions, and the Human Frontier Council saw an opportunity for de-escalation that was too valuable to dismiss. Shekai didn't return to her full duties immediately. The Eclipse Guard could function without her for a while, and her presence on Crosspoint Sanctuary became a symbol of the tentative peace both sides were trying to build. She worked with Jaren and Captain Chen to design the joint survey mission, navigating the complicated politics of mixed crews and shared data. A month after the bond's invocation, they presented their proposal. A 6-month mission mapping the fragment zone's most dangerous areas, with crews from both species learning to work together in an environment where cooperation was literally survival. Jaren reviewed the proposal on his datapad, then looked at Shekai, who was currently arguing with a scaring engineer about proper shield configurations, with an intensity that suggested she was actually enjoying herself. You know, he said when she rejoined him, when I pulled you out of that corridor I thought I was just preventing a death. You were, Shekai said. Just not the death you expected. What's that supposed to mean? It means you killed the version of me that believed mercy was weakness. That honor only came through decisive violence. That enemies could never become anything else. She met his eyes, and there was warmth alongside the fierceness. You finished that version of me, and helped create someone better. Jaren thought about that, about how one decision, to help someone trapped, had rippled outward into diplomatic incidents and joint missions and the beginning of something that might actually resemble peace. Well, he said finally, I guess that's one way to win a war, refuse to fight it the way everyone expects. Is that what we're doing, winning? I don't know, but I think we're building something better than victory. And in the observation lounge of a neutral station, with both their governments scrambling to understand what precedent had been set, a human and a Scarine stood side by side, watching the stars and planning impossibly optimistic steps forward. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act was refusing to finish what someone else started. 3 months after the Bond's invocation, the joint survey mission launched from Crosspoint Sanctuary with a crew that nobody was entirely certain would survive working together. The ship, diplomatically named Common Ground, was larger than the Nomad's Drift, designed to accommodate both human and Scarine crew requirements without making anyone too uncomfortable. The compromise in design philosophy resulted in a vessel that was functional if aesthetically confused, which Jaren thought was appropriate symbolism. He stood in the command center. They deliberately avoided calling it a bridge to prevent arguments about who was actually in command, watching the mixed crew go through final system checks. Shekai moved among them with easy authority, offering corrections in both Scarine and human standard, somehow making diplomatic suggestions sound like tactical orders. You're nervous, she observed, appearing beside him with that unsettling ability she had to move silently despite the armor she'd resumed wearing, new armor, not the sacred kind but impressive nonetheless. I'm concerned, Jaren corrected. There's a difference. Explain the difference. Nervous implies I think something will go wrong. Concerned means I'm aware something could go wrong and I'm preparing for it. He gestured to the crew. We're asking people who have been trained to see each other as enemies to work together in an environment where mistakes are fatal. That's a lot of trust to build in a short time. Then we build it by example. She raised her voice slightly. All stations, final check. Humans, verify with your Scarine counterparts. Scarine, confirm with your human partners. I want acknowledgement that every system has been reviewed by both perspectives. The chatter that followed was stilted but functional. Human engineers comparing notes with Scarine technicians. Navigation plotting courses with input from both species' spatial calculation methods. It wasn't smooth, but it was happening, which was more than many people had predicted. Captain Chen had come aboard for the launch, though she wasn't staying for the mission itself. She found Jaren during the final preparations, her expression carrying satisfaction and concern in equal measure. This is either the start of something important or a spectacular disaster, she said without preamble. Thank you for that inspiring send-off. I'm a diplomat. Inspiring is not part of my job description. She watched the crew working. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, what you did, pulling Princess Shekai from that corridor, was either incredibly lucky or the universe's idea of a very elaborate joke. But the results speak for themselves. The results being political chaos and a ship full of people who aren't sure if they should be cooperating or preparing for betrayal. The results being the first genuine cooperation between our species in 3 years. The first suggestion that maybe we can see each other as something other than obstacles or enemies. She turned to look at him directly. You changed the narrative, Kavak. Accidentally perhaps, but effectively. Now you get to see if the change holds. The mission's first week was tense. The crew maintained professional courtesy, but there was an invisible line down the center of every room, humans on one side, Scarine on the other. Jaren and Shekai worked deliberately to cross that line constantly, consulting each other publicly, deferring to each other's expertise, making it clear that cooperation wasn't just policy but practice. The breakthrough came during their first encounter with a genuinely dangerous spatial anomaly, an unstable corridor that was expanding rather than collapsing, threatening to tear a hole in normal space large enough to destabilize the entire region. "This is beyond our projections," the human navigation officer reported, his voice tight. "If we use standard human containment protocols, we will stabilize the edges but not address the core instability," the scaring engineer finished. "And if we use traditional scaring spatial harmonics, we'll collapse it too quickly and create a shockwave that could damage surrounding space," Jaren completed. "So we need both approaches, simultaneously." What followed was controlled chaos as human and scaring crew members worked together out of necessity rather than policy. Human precision with mathematical modeling, combined with scaring intuitive understanding of spatial harmonics. Engineering solutions emerged from heated debates that turned into genuine collaboration. By the time they'd stabilized the corridor and established warning beacons, the invisible line down the center of the ship had become significantly less distinct. That night, ship's night, at least, Jaren found Shekai in the observation deck, watching the stars with the kind of focus that suggested she was thinking rather than just looking. "We did good work today," he offered, joining her. "We did necessary work, there is a difference." Jaren smiled. "You're starting to sound like me, a concerning development." She was quiet for a moment. "Jaren, do you regret it? Invoking the bond complicated your life considerably." "You invoked the bond. I just pulled you out of a corridor." "Answer the question." He thought about it honestly. His quiet life of solo survey missions was gone, probably forever. He was now the human who'd accidentally started a diplomatic revolution, who commanded a joint mission that could either prove cooperation was possible or spectacularly demonstrate why the two species couldn't work together. His name was in reports being read by people whose job titles included words like secretary and admiral. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. It's complicated and sometimes exhausting, but I don't regret it." "Why not?" "Because you were right. About mercy not being weakness. About it being possible to build something better than victory." He gestured toward the stars, where both human and scaring territories spread across the void. "Because 3 months ago, the idea of our species cooperating was basically theoretical. Now it's just Tuesday. It is actually Thursday on both our calendar systems. The point stands." She laughed, that genuine sound he'd heard too rarely in the early days but was becoming more common. "Yes, the point stands." The mission continued. They mapped unstable corridors, marked dangerous zones, and gradually the crew became less a collection of humans and scaring and more just a crew. There were still tensions, still moments when cultural differences created friction, but there was also growing trust. 2 months in, they received a joint request from both governments: extend the mission. The data they were gathering was valuable, yes, but more valuable was the proof that cooperation worked. Other joint ventures were being proposed, using common ground as the model. "We're becoming symbolic," Jaren observed, reading the request. "We were always symbolic," Shekai corrected. "Now we're being effective as well." They accepted the extension. By month 4, the crew was running joint training exercises. Humans teaching scaring about human emergency protocols. Scaring teaching humans about spatial harmonic detection. By month 5, off-duty crew members were socializing across species lines, sharing food from both cultures and discovering that yes, human synthesizers were terrible, but scaring preserved protein was somehow worse. On the final day of the extended mission, Jaren stood in the command center watching the crew secure systems for return to Crosspoint Sanctuary. Shekai joined him, her new armor reflecting the display lights. "So," she said, 6 months of proving cooperation is possible. What have we learned?" "That it's harder than it should be, easier than we feared, and absolutely worth the trouble." He pulled up the mission data, thousands of mapped anomalies, hundreds of potential disasters prevented, and one thoroughly integrated crew that would make both their governments very nervous. Also that your people are terrible at poker but excellent at spatial mathematics, while my people are good at improvisation but need to learn patience. Those are your tactical observations. I'm a survey officer. My tactical observations involve a lot of spatial coordinates. She smiled. Then allow me to offer strategic observations. We prove that enemies can become allies when someone refuses to perpetuate enmity. That mercy can be stronger than victory. That sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply choosing to see someone else as worth understanding. Those are some very optimistic strategic observations. You taught me optimism. I'm using it productively. The return to Crosspoint Sanctuary was met with considerably more ceremony than their departure. Both governments sent delegations. The crew was formally recognized for their work. And Jaren found himself in another diplomatic chamber, this time receiving commendations he wasn't entirely comfortable accepting. Ambassador Krell, who'd spent 6 months visibly aging as he dealt with the political implications of the bond, presented Shekai with formal acknowledgement of her bond's success. Your Highness, the Empire recognizes that your unconventional approach has yielded positive results. The Empire recognizes that honor still matters, Shekai corrected gently, even when it's inconvenient. Captain Chen presented Jaren with a promotion he absolutely didn't want, and a request he found intriguing. Command of a permanent joint survey program, expanding on what common ground had proven possible. You're offering me more paperwork and political complications, Jaren summarized. Yes, but also the chance to keep building what you started, accidentally perhaps but effectively. He looked at Shekai, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. They'd gotten good at communicating without words over 6 months of close cooperation. All right, he said. But I want that in writing that I'm doing this under protest and would much rather be mapping empty space alone. I'll make a note in your file. That evening, Jaren and Shekai stood on the same observation deck where they'd first discussed the bond, watching ships come and go against the infinite backdrop. So what happens now? Jaren asked. You return to the Eclipse Guard. I continue making governments nervous by suggesting radical ideas like cooperation. Perhaps. Or perhaps we continue demonstrating that the most effective way to end a war is to refuse to fight it the way everyone expects. She looked at him, and there was warmth in her expression that had nothing to do with warfare or politics. You saved me from a collapsing corridor. I claimed you through an ancient bond. Together we proved that enemies can become partners. What happens now is we keep proving it. That sounds exhausting. It is, but also worthwhile. In the viewport, he could see the common ground being prepared for its next mission. A larger crew this time, expanding the program, taking what they'd learned and building on it. Both governments were nervous about the implications but couldn't deny the results. You know, Jaren said thoughtfully, when you told me to finish you, I thought you meant kill you. I did, but I finished something else instead. You finished the war between us, ended it not through victory but through refusal to participate in its premise. She smiled. You finished my certainty that mercy was weakness, that honor required decisive violence, that enemies could never become anything else. You were very thorough. So what am I supposed to call you now? Partner, ally, really persistent person who decided to attach herself to my life. You call me Shekai, and I call you Jaren. And together we call ourselves proof that sometimes the best way to win is to change what winning means. And on a neutral station where two species were learning to see each other differently, where a human and a Scarian stood side by side not because of duty but because of choice, the future remained uncertain but possible. Because sometimes mercy was the most decisive action of all. Sometimes refusing to finish something was how you built something better. And sometimes the most important battles were won by people who never wanted to fight in the first place. Jaren Kavak had pulled a dying warrior from a collapsing corridor, without knowing she was a princess, without expecting gratitude, without asking for anything in return. And in doing so, he'd accidentally rewritten the rules of engagement for an entire conflict. Not bad for a survey officer who just wanted to map empty space in peace. Same time next week. Shekai asked as they prepared to leave the observation deck. "We're launching in 3 days. I know, but asking about next week is optimistic. I'm using optimism productively. You really are terrible at this. I learned from the best." And despite everything, the politics, the complications, the weight of symbolism they both carried, Jaren smiled. Because somehow, accidentally, he'd found exactly what he'd been looking for when he joined the Survey Corps. A purpose that mattered, work that made a difference, and a partnership that proved some things were worth the trouble. Even if the trouble involved diplomatic incidents, ancient traditions, and a princess who decided that mercy was worth standing with. Especially that.